what we do, we hope, contributes to the monarchy and the way in which it can convey continuity of not just interest, but of service, of understanding.
A quiet palace moment turns into a royal shock when Camilla's words about young Princess Charlotte are caught on camera. What was meant to stay private sparks a fierce reaction, and Princess Anne does not hold back. One sentence changes trust, power, and family balance forever. What did Camilla really say? Why did it push Anne to explode? Stay with us. A careless sentence inside quiet walls. On January 4th, 2026, the palace woke under a quiet sky that felt almost kind. The morning moved slowly, as if time itself wished to protect what was still innocent. Princess Charlotte was laughing somewhere far from the center rooms, unaware that her name would soon carry a weight too heavy for a child. Inside the inner corridors, power rested on soft footsteps and careful smiles. Queen Camilla began her day with routine calm. She believed order was control, and control was survival. Her years inside the royal world had taught her to speak gently, to measure every word. Yet even careful people grow tired. That morning, something unsettled her. It was not anger, but unease, the feeling of being slowly replaced by the future she could no longer guide. The conversation happened without warning. It was meant to be private, wrapped in trust and familiarity. Camilla spoke while tea cooled beside her, her voice relaxed, almost thoughtful. She mentioned Princess Charlotte not with cruelty, but with assumption. Her words suggested limits, expectations, and a narrow path shaped by tradition and convenience. What she said was small, yet sharp, like a pin pressed into silk. She did not know a recording system had been left active after an earlier briefing. No red light flashed, no warning sounded. The palace was full of technology designed to protect, not expose. The moment passed quickly, sealed by confidence and habit. Camilla moved on, believing nothing had changed. Minutes later, a junior aide noticed something strange. A file remained open where it should have closed. Sound levels flickered on a screen that should have gone dark. The aide froze, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. In the royal world, silence could be loyalty, but it could also be betrayal. The recording was replayed once, then again. Each time, the meaning grew heavier. It was not the tone alone, but the implication. Princess Charlotte was spoken of as an idea, not a child. As a piece in a future arrangement rather than a young girl still learning who she was. Word traveled carefully, as it always did. No running footsteps, no raised voices, just quiet glances and tightened expressions. The palace had learned long ago how to panic without noise. Senior staff were informed in fragments, each person receiving just enough truth to understand the danger. Camilla remained unaware as the air around her shifted. She attended her scheduled meeting, smiling, listening, offering polite agreement. Yet something was missing. Respect felt thinner, warmth faded. People answered her with fewer words. The palace had begun to move without her noticing. Elsewhere, Princess Anne was finishing her morning duties. She had always believed that children in the family should be guarded fiercely. Titles could wait, power could wait, childhood could not. Anne had lived long enough to see what careless words could become when time sharpened them. The message reached her indirectly, carried through careful language and lowered voices. Anne asked one question and received silence in return. That silence told her everything. When she finally listened to the recording, her face hardened, not with shock but with recognition. She had heard this kind of thinking before, dressed in politeness and excuse. Anne did not react immediately. She believed anger wasted power when used too early. Instead, she listened again, slower this time. Each word felt deliberate, even if it had not been intended that way. The future of the monarchy, in her mind, did not belong to comfort or convenience. It belonged to protection. By the afternoon, the palace felt divided by invisible lines. Nothing official had happened, yet everything had changed. Camilla sensed resistance but could not name it. Anne carried certainty like armor. And somewhere beyond the walls, Princess Charlotte continued her day, still smiling, still safe for now. As evening approached, containment became the unspoken priority. Advisors debated softly about procedure, reputation, and timing. No one mentioned emotion aloud, yet everyone felt it. This was not about the scandal alone. It was about who held influence over the story of tomorrow. Some believed the matter could be softened, explained away, or quietly buried. Others feared that burying it would only poison the ground beneath them. Camilla finally noticed the distance. Conversations ended faster when she entered rooms. Eyes shifted. She wondered if she had misstepped, or if the palace itself was simply restless. She reassured herself that experience still mattered, that she understood the institution better than most, yet confidence wavered when it stood alone. Anne, meanwhile, began preparing for a conversation she had avoided for years. She reviewed memories, old compromises, and moments when silence had been chosen for peace. This time felt different. The future was closer now. The child was real, and the cost of doing nothing felt heavier than the cost of confrontation. By nightfall, messages had reached those who could not be ignored. William was informed in careful terms, shielded from drama but not from truth. He listened without interruption. When the call ended, he did not speak for a long time. Protection, once awakened, does not sleep easily. The palace lights dimmed, but tension did not. Somewhere between loyalty and fear, a decision was forming. The recording could not be unseen. The words could not be unheard. And by the time morning returned, the silence holding everything together would no longer be strong enough. Panic rapped, in polite voices. Morning returned without comfort. The palace moved as it always did, steady and elegant, yet something unseen pressed against every hallway. By January 5th, 2026 had not yet begun. The damage from the previous day had already spread. No announcement had been made, yet too many people knew. Knowledge inside royal walls never stayed still for long. Senior aides gathered in small clusters, careful never to look like meetings. Words like concern, sensitivity, and protocol floated through the air, chosen for their softness rather than their truth. What haunted them was not the recording itself, but what it represented. A line had been crossed, even if no one agreed on when or how. The recording was reviewed again under stricter supervision. Each listener heard something slightly different, shaped by loyalty and fear. Some argued the words were harmless, taken out of context, spoken without intent. Others heard something colder, something that revealed how power judged the future before it arrived. No one denied the risk. Camilla was informed that there was an issue, though not yet its full shape. She was told there had been a misunderstanding involving private remarks. The careful wording irritated her. She had survived worse than misunderstandings. Still, she felt the room closing in. Her position had always depended on balance, and balance was slipping. She asked who had heard the recording. The answer was unclear. She asked how far it had traveled. The answer was worse. No one could say with confidence that it could be contained. The palace had once been built on secrecy, but the modern world made silence fragile. Camilla's frustration grew, not from guilt, but from feeling cornered. She believed loyalty should protect her, that years of service earned grace, yet the faces around her did not offer reassurance. They offered distance. In that space, doubt began to bloom. Across the palace, Princess Anne was being urged to remain calm. Advisors suggested patience, warning that strong reactions could deepen divisions. Anne listened, but she did not agree. She understood delay, but she also understood children. And she understood that silence often protected the wrong people. Anne spoke quietly, asking who was taking responsibility. No one answered directly. Responsibility, it seemed, was being passed like an unwanted object. That alone hardened her resolve. The monarchy had survived because someone always stepped forward when others stepped back. Meanwhile, Prince William continued his day outwardly unchanged. Meetings were held, documents were reviewed, smiles were offered when required. Inside, however, the focus narrowed. Charlotte's face came to his mind again and again. He did not yet know every word that had been said, but he knew enough. Enough to feel something protective shift into place. William requested the full context. The request was met with hesitation. He did not push, but his silence carried weight. Those around him understood that once he spoke, the shape of the problem would change. For now, he listened. Efforts to manage the situation intensified. Legal considerations were raised. Discussions about internal discipline were floated without commitment. Some hoped the issue could be reframed as concern rather than judgment. Others feared that any explanation would sound like an excuse. Every option carried consequences. Camilla sensed she was losing control of the narrative. She began defending herself in private conversations, insisting her words had been misinterpreted. She reminded others of her loyalty to the family, of sacrifices made, of years spent navigating hostility. Her defense was not loud, but it was constant. What troubled her most was Anne's silence. Anne did not argue, she did not accuse, she simply withdrew. That withdrawal felt heavier than confrontation. It signaled that the matter had moved beyond disagreement and into principle. As the day wore on, more voices joined the conversation. Some spoke of tradition, of how future roles must be discussed honestly. Others warned that children should never carry adult expectations so early. The palace had always balanced past and future, but now the scales shook. By late afternoon, the focus shifted to damage control. Who would speak first, if anyone spoke at all? Whether a quiet acknowledgement would suffice, whether silence would be seen as guilt. No decision satisfied everyone, which meant no decision came easily. William finally listened to the recording in full. He said nothing when it ended. Those present waited for reaction, for anger or denial. Instead, he asked a simple question about intent. The answer did not satisfy him. Intent, he knew, did not erase impact. Elsewhere, Princess Anne prepared herself. She had seen crises before, many of them worse in scale. But this one touched something deeper. It involved a child, and it revealed how easily future generations could be shaped by careless authority. Anne believed the monarchy survived only when it learned. Camilla felt the shift before it was spoken. Invitations grew formal. Conversations became guarded. Her confidence no longer steadied the room. For the first time in years, she felt watched rather than followed. That awareness unsettled her more than any public criticism ever had. As evening approached, the palace settled into a tense quiet. Decisions hovered, unmade but inevitable. Anne was ready to speak. William was ready to act. And Camilla, still believing the matter could be softened, did not yet understand how close she was to losing control. The night ended with no resolution, only direction. The silence that had once protected the family now threatened to expose it. And by morning, restraint would no longer be enough to hold back what was coming. Anne breaks. The quiet that protected them all. Princess Anne did not raise her voice when she finally moved. She did not need to. Her reputation had always done the shouting for her. On the morning of January 5th, 2026, she rose with purpose, carrying the calm of someone who had already decided where she stood. For Anne, hesitation was a luxury the monarchy could no longer afford. She had spent the night thinking, not about scandal or reputation, but about pattern. She had seen this before in different forms, spoken with different names, the habit of shaping children into symbols. The tendency to decide their limits long before they discovered their strengths. Anne had survived in a system like that, but survival had come at a cost she never forgot. When she requested a private meeting, no one questioned it. The palace understood that when Anne asked, it was not a suggestion. Advisors exchanged looks, aware that this conversation would not be softened by protocol. Some hoped it would be brief. Others feared it would be defining. Camilla arrived composed, dressed with care, her posture steady. She believed this would be a discussion, perhaps uncomfortable but manageable. Anne greeted her politely, without warmth and without hostility. That balance alone should have been a warning. Anne did not begin with accusation. She spoke of duty, of responsibility, of how the monarchy survived by protecting its most vulnerable members. Her tone was measured, almost gentle. Camilla listened, nodding occasionally, expecting the moment to pass. Then Anne referenced the recording. The shift was immediate. Camilla stiffened, her expression tightening as she realized the depth of what had escaped her control. She defended herself instinctively, explaining context, intention, years of experience. She spoke of tradition and realism, of understanding the institution as it truly was. Anne listened without interruption. When Camilla finished, Anne allowed a pause long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then she spoke again, slower now, each word placed with care. She explained that intention did not outweigh consequence, that speaking about a child's future as if it were already decided was not guidance but possession. She said the monarchy did not own children, it served them, and service required restraint. Camilla pushed back, reminding Anne of the pressure that came with shaping a future queen. She argued that honesty was necessary, that expectations had always existed. Her voice rose slightly, frustration breaking through polish. That was when Anne changed. She leaned forward, her composure sharpening into something unyielding. She spoke of how expectation had been used for decades to excuse cruelty dressed as realism. She reminded Camilla that Charlotte was not a project or a precaution, but a person, a child who deserved time before judgment. The room fell quiet. Not the polite quiet of etiquette, but the heavy stillness of truth landing without invitation. Anne went further. She spoke of loyalty, not as obedience but as protection. She said loyalty meant standing between children and the weight of adult fear. She said silence had been chosen too often in the past, and each time it had cost the family more than it saved. Camilla felt cornered. She had expected resistance, but not condemnation. She reminded Anne of her sacrifices, of years spent enduring criticism to support the crown. She asked whether those years counted for nothing. Anne did not deny them. She acknowledged Camilla's endurance, her resilience, but she also made something clear. Endurance did not grant permission to shape others without consent. Strength did not excuse harm, even unintentional harm. For the first time, Camilla felt something slip, not authority, but certainty. She realized this conversation was not about apology or clarification. It was about boundaries, and Anne was drawing it without compromise. Anne ended the meeting without drama. She stated plainly that the matter would not be buried, that William would be involved fully, that the family would address what had happened, privately if possible, firmly regardless. She did not threaten, she did not negotiate, she concluded. Camilla left unsettled, her confidence shaken in a way no public criticism had ever achieved. She had been challenged not as a figure, but as a force, and she knew Anne would not retreat. Word spread quickly that the meeting had not gone well. No details were shared, but tone carried truth. Advisors understood that a shift had occurred. Anne had taken control of the moral center of the issue, and that center now leaned toward the future rather than tradition. William was informed shortly afterward. He listened carefully, absorbing not just what was said, but what was implied. Anne's stance aligned with instincts he had been suppressing since the recording surfaced. Hearing her speak so clearly removed the last of his hesitation. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he asked for time. Those who knew him understood that time meant strategy, not avoidance. Protection required precision. Camilla spent the afternoon isolated, replaying the conversation in her mind. She searched for moments she could have softened, words she could have reclaimed, but Anne's message remained clear and unmovable. The palace was no longer protecting her position, it was protecting the next generation. As evening approached, Anne stood alone for a moment, looking out across the grounds. She felt no satisfaction, only resolve. Confrontation was never her goal. Preservation was. And she knew the hardest part was still ahead. Because once William spoke, the matter would no longer be contained within quiet rooms and careful language. It would become something larger, something permanent. The silence that followed Anne's stand was not calm. It was the stillness before authority changed hands. William steps out of the shadow of patience. Prince William had learned the value of waiting from an early age. In the royal world, patience was often praised as wisdom. Silence was framed as strength. But on the evening of January 5, 2026, patience no longer felt like protection. It felt like delay, and delay felt dangerous. He sat alone after being fully briefed, the recording already familiar in his mind. It was not the words themselves that troubled him most, but the ease with which they had been spoken, the casual nature of the assumption, the quiet certainty that a child's future could be narrowed without her voice ever being heard. William had spent years preparing himself to lead differently. Now that promise was being tested. Catherine noticed the shift before he spoke. She always did. She listened as he explained, not interrupting, not reacting outwardly. When he finished, she said very little. She did not need to. Her expression carried agreement, and something firmer beneath it. Protection did not always require noise. Sometimes it required direction. William requested a meeting, not an urgent summons, not a public display, a deliberate request, framed with courtesy but weighted with intent. Those who received it understood immediately that this was no longer an internal discussion among advisors. This was a line being crossed. No, Camilla arrived composed once again, though the calm she wore was thinner now. She had already faced Anne's certainty, and she sensed William would be less forgiving in a different way. Anne spoke for principle. William spoke for the future. He began calmly, acknowledging the pressure that came with guiding the monarchy through uncertain times. He spoke of shared responsibility and collective endurance. For a moment, Camilla believed the meeting might still bend toward understanding. Then William shifted. He spoke about Charlotte. Not as a symbol, not as an heir, as a child. He spoke of her curiosity, her gentleness, her right to grow without invisible expectations tightening around her too soon. His voice remained steady, but the message was unmistakable. This was personal. Camilla responded carefully, choosing her words with more caution than before. She reiterated her belief in preparation, in realism, in the burden of future roles. She insisted she meant no harm, that her concern came from experience. William did not argue. He listened. Then he said something that changed the air. He explained that experience did not give ownership, that no one had the authority to decide who Charlotte would become before she had the chance to choose for herself. He said the monarchy would survive only if it learned to protect its children from becoming tools of adult anxiety. The room felt smaller, not tense but contained, as if the conversation had moved into a space where compromise could no longer exist. William made it clear that this was not about punishment. It was about boundaries. He said the family would not accept language that limited Charlotte's future, regardless of intent. He said the recording had revealed something that could not be ignored, and ignoring it would be a failure of duty. Camilla felt the weight of his words settle slowly. She realized this was not a negotiation. William was not seeking agreement. He was stating position. She asked what he intended to do. William did not answer immediately. He said he would speak with his father, with Anne, and with those responsible for guiding the family forward. He said the matter would be addressed internally, but firmly. He said trust would need to be rebuilt. What unsettled Camilla most was his restraint. There was no anger, no accusation, no raised voice, just clarity. And clarity left no room to hide. After the meeting, William did not linger. He returned to his duties outwardly unchanged, but something had shifted beneath the surface. Those who worked closely with him felt it. Decisions were sharper, priorities clearer. The future was no longer abstract. Anne was informed shortly afterward. She did not smile, but she felt relief. William had stepped into the role she had hoped he would claim. Not as a reactionary figure, but as a guardian. She knew then that the matter would not dissolve into polite nothingness. Camilla withdrew further as the day continued. Invitations slowed, conversations shortened. She sensed the balance of influence adjusting around her, quietly but decisively. The palace was not turning against her, but it was turning away. That evening, William spent time with Charlotte. He watched her laugh, listened to her stories, observed the ease with which she moved through her world. It reinforced everything he had said. No child carrying that light should feel the weight of adult fear pressing down too early. The decision forming in him was no longer just about this incident. It was about precedent, about making it clear that the next generation would not be shaped by whispered judgments and quiet assumptions. Behind the scenes, advisors began preparing for subtle changes. Not announcements, not statements, but adjustments in access, influence, and involvement. The monarchy was skilled at evolution disguised as continuity. Camilla sensed these movements but could not yet name them. She wondered whether she had misjudged the moment, or whether the moment had finally outgrown her. The uncertainty unsettled her more than any direct challenge. As night fell, William stood firm in his resolve. He knew this path would not be easy. It would strain relationships and unsettle old structures. But he also knew something else. If he failed to act now, he would carry that failure far longer than any temporary discomfort. When loyalty splits quietly down the middle. By the morning of January 6, 2026, the palace felt different. Not louder, not chaotic, simply altered, like a room where furniture had been moved in the dark. People still walked the same halls, followed the same schedules, but loyalty no longer flowed in a single direction. It paused, it hesitated, it chose sides without speaking their names. Nothing had been announced. Nothing official had changed. Yet influence had begun to rearrange itself, quietly and efficiently. Those closest to the future adjusted their steps first. Meetings shifted. Invitations were reconsidered. Advice once sought automatically was now filtered, weighed, and sometimes ignored. Camilla noticed the change most sharply in what did not happen. She was no longer asked to weigh in early. Decisions reached her already shaped. Conversations that once lingered now ended politely and too soon. Respect remained, but access thinned, and access had always been the true measure of power. She told herself it was temporary. Moments like this passed. They always had, yet something in the air resisted reassurance. This did not feel like a pause. It felt like recalibration. Across the palace, alliances adjusted with careful grace. Some senior figures leaned toward Anne, recognizing the steadiness she represented. Others aligned more clearly with William, sensing the certainty of a future king who had chosen his ground. No one announced loyalty. It revealed itself through attendance, timing, and tone. Anne remained outwardly unchanged. She neither celebrated nor softened her stance. She understood that quiet authority lasted longer than triumph. Still, she felt the weight of what she had set in motion. Divisions, once formed, rarely healed without effort. William continued his duties with increased focus. He spoke more, not louder, and listened less to those who spoke in circles. His clarity drew others toward him. In moments of uncertainty, people seek direction, and he was offering it without hesitation. Catherine supported this shift without drawing attention to herself. She reinforced stability where tension threatened to spill. Her presence reminded others that the future was not simply being defended, but carefully nurtured. Together, they projected something the palace had been craving without naming: confidence without aggression. Camilla struggled privately. She replayed conversations, searched for moments where a different tone might have changed the outcome. She considered reaching out, offering clarification, perhaps even concession. But pride held her back. So did fear. Apology could be seen as weakness, and weakness was rarely forgiven in royal memory. She confided in a small circle, seeking reassurance that her position remained secure. The responses were respectful but cautious. No one challenged William openly. No one dismissed Anne's influence. The silence spoke more clearly than any warning. As the day progressed, the question no one voiced grew heavier. Who truly guided the monarchy now? Tradition had once answered that easily. Experience had once carried authority by default. Now, protection of the next generation had become the unspoken priority, and with it came new standards. The recording remained locked away, but its existence shaped every interaction. It had become a symbol, not of scandal, but of awakening. The palace could no longer pretend that private beliefs stayed private. Words, once released, shaped futures. Anne observed these shifts with a mixture of resolve and concern. She had not intended to fracture loyalty, only to correct direction. Yet she knew that correction often came with discomfort. The monarchy had endured worse, but only when it learned. William met with several senior figures that afternoon. The conversations were calm, forward-looking, and unmistakably firm. He spoke of safeguarding childhood, of modern responsibility, of learning from moments that challenged old thinking. He did not mention Camilla by name. He did not need to. Those meetings signaled something important. This was not a personal dispute, it was a change in values, and values once adjusted reshaped everything beneath them. Camilla felt increasingly isolated as the day wore on. She walked familiar corridors that now felt longer, colder. She wondered whether her years of endurance had been quietly reinterpreted, whether survival alone was no longer enough. That evening, Anne and William spoke briefly. No strategy was discussed, no plans were outlined. They did not need to be. Understanding had settled between them, solid and unspoken. They were aligned not by ambition, but by duty. Elsewhere, Charlotte's name was carefully removed from adult conversations, not by rule, but by instinct. The palace had learned its lesson, at least for now. Childhood was being reclaimed from speculation. As night fell, Camilla stood at her window, looking out over the grounds she had fought so hard to belong to. She realized that belonging did not always mean shaping outcomes. Sometimes it meant stepping back. The thought unsettled her more than any confrontation had. The monarchy did not fracture that day. It was adjusted, quietly, decisively. Lines were redrawn without ink. Influence shifted without ceremony. And while no one spoke of winners or losses, everyone understood that something essential had changed. The crown had chosen its direction. And once chosen, it would not easily turn back. The price of words. By January 7, 2026, the palace had settled into a careful rhythm that felt rehearsed but fragile. The outward calm returned, polished and dependable, yet everyone understood it rested on adjustment, not resolution. What had been said could not be unsaid. What had been revealed could not be hidden again. Behind closed doors, consequences took shape without announcement. Schedules were revised. Briefings became selective. Access narrowed not through decree but through habit. This was how the monarchy absorbed shock without cracking. It did not confront loudly. It was redirected. Camilla felt the cost most clearly in moments that once belonged to her. She was still present, still acknowledged, still treated with courtesy. Yet the center had shifted. Conversations began elsewhere. Decisions were discussed before reaching her. Influence no longer gathered at her side by default. She tried to steady herself by focusing on duty. Appearances were made, commitments were honored. She reminded herself that survival within the institution had always required endurance. But endurance felt heavier now, as if the ground beneath it had softened. Privately, she confronted the weight of her own words. Not their intent, which she continued to defend, but their impact, which had grown beyond her control. She had believed experience allowed honesty. She had not considered how honesty could harden into judgment when spoken without care. Anne, meanwhile, carried a different burden. She had drawn the line, and lines invited consequence. She worried not about backlash, but about fracture. Her loyalty had always been to the crown as a living thing, not a collection of roles. Protecting it sometimes meant standing against those within it. She checked in quietly with those who mattered most, ensuring that firmness did not turn into cruelty. Anne believed accountability should sharpen understanding, not destroy it. Still, she did not soften her stance. Children, once exposed to expectation too early, rarely escaped it fully. William continued to guide the internal shift with measured clarity. He did not seek an apology. He did not request an explanation. He focused on future safeguards. Advisors were instructed to redirect discussions away from speculation about Charlotte's role. Childhood was to be preserved as long as possible. His approach unsettled some who preferred tradition over change, yet even they recognized the necessity. Public trust had evolved. The monarchy could no longer afford to appear detached from the humanity of its youngest members. Catherine reinforced this quietly, ensuring warmth filled the spaces where tension threatened to linger. Her presence softened the transition, reminding those around her that protection was not punishment. It was care. The recording itself remained sealed, its existence acknowledged but contained. It had served its purpose, not as leverage, but as a mirror. The palace had been forced to see something it had long avoided. Camilla considered reaching out, offering a measured acknowledgement that avoided apology while signaling understanding. Each draft of thought ended the same way. Words, once released, were unreliable. They could heal or wound depending on how they were received. And reception was no longer hers to control. She realized then that power within the monarchy was no longer anchored solely in position or longevity. It flowed toward those who shaped the future with restraint. That realization was sobering. Anne observed Camilla's withdrawal with mixed emotion. She did not relish another's discomfort, but she also knew that unchecked authority aged poorly. Correction, however painful, was part of survival. As days passed, the palace adjusted to its new balance. Meetings regained efficiency. Laughter returned in measured doses. The sense of crisis faded into memory, replaced by awareness. Awareness lasted longer. William felt the weight of leadership settle more fully onto his shoulders. This had been a test, not of strength, but of direction. He had chosen protection over convenience. The choice would follow him long after this moment passed. That evening, he spoke briefly with Anne. No reassurances were offered. None were needed. They shared an understanding shaped by responsibility rather than emotion. The monarchy had been nudged forward, not dragged. That mattered. Camilla spent that night reflecting on years spent earning acceptance. She wondered whether acceptance was ever permanent. Perhaps it was always conditional, shaped by relevance rather than loyalty. The thought stung, but it also clarified something she had avoided. Influence was borrowed, never owned. The next morning arrived with routine intact. The palace had not collapsed. The crown had not cracked. Instead, it had absorbed the shock and adjusted its posture. That, too, was survival. Yet beneath the calm, something permanent had settled. A lesson, quiet but firm. Words spoken without care carried cost beyond intention. And those costs were paid not all at once, but slowly, through diminished certainty and altered trust. By nightfall, the family moved forward, aware that the incident would not define them, but it would shape them. The price had been paid without spectacle. The lesson had been learned without announcement. And in that quiet acceptance, the monarchy prepared for what came next. The line that changed everything. By January 8, 2026, the palace had returned to its familiar shape. The schedules were full again. The corridors echoed with calm purpose. To the outside world, nothing had happened. Inside, everyone knew better. A line had been drawn, not in anger, but in certainty. No statement was issued, no apology was demanded. The monarchy did not move that way. Instead, it chose something far more lasting. It chose adjustment, the kind that settles quietly and never fully reverses. Camilla sensed the final shape of her new position that morning. It was not humiliation, it was a limitation. She was still respected, still included, but no longer central. Decisions flowed around her rather than through her. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Influence once lost rarely announced its departure. She accepted this with outward grace. Years in the royal world had taught her how to survive moments like this, yet inside, something shifted. For the first time, she understood that her role would now be defined by restraint rather than reach. The realization was painful, but also clarifying. Battles were over. Balance had replaced ambition. Princess Anne watched these changes with quiet resolve. She did not seek acknowledgement for what she had done. That had never been her way. Her satisfaction came from knowing that a child had been shielded and that the institution had listened when it mattered. Anne believed history was shaped by moments when someone refused to stay silent. She reflected briefly on her own childhood, on expectations placed too early and words spoken too freely. She knew those marks never fully faded. If she had prevented even one such mark from forming, the discomfort would have been worth it. William moved forward with renewed focus. The incident had clarified his leadership in a way no preparation ever could. He understood now that authority was not granted by title alone, but by willingness to protect. His decisions became cleaner, guided by principle rather than precedent. He made it clear, without formal announcement, that Charlotte's childhood was not to be discussed, predicted, or shaped by adult fear. Advisors understood, family members adjusted. The message traveled quietly and efficiently. Boundaries once set became a habit. Catherine supported this future with warmth rather than rule. She ensured Charlotte remained untouched by tension, free to laugh, learn, and grow without awareness of the storm that had passed near her name. Protection, she believed, worked best when it left no scars. Charlotte herself remained unchanged. She played, she learned, she dreamed. Her innocence stood in sharp contrast to the weight that had briefly hovered near her future. That innocence was now fiercely guarded. Within the family, relationships settled into a new order. Some grew closer through shared values. Others became more distant, polite but careful. No one spoke openly about the shift, yet everyone adjusted their steps around it. The monarchy had recalibrated its heart. Camilla and Anne crossed paths later that day. The exchange was brief, courteous, and restrained. There was no apology and no accusation. There did not need to be. Understanding rested between them, firm and unspoken. Some lessons did not require repetition. As evening approached, the palace grew quiet again. Not tense, quiet, but reflective. The kind that follows changes once it has been accepted. The crown had not been weakened by the moment. It had been refined. William stood alone for a moment, looking out across the grounds. He thought about legacy, not as power passed down, but as protection passed forward. He understood now that the future would judge not how much control he held, but how carefully he used it. The family moved on without ceremony. Life resumed. Duties continued. But something essential had shifted beneath the surface. A new standard had been set. Children would no longer be shaped in whispers. Futures would no longer be narrowed in private. The monarchy had chosen restraint over dominance, protection over convenience. It had chosen the next generation. And in doing so, it ensured that what happened would never truly happen again.